Hi everybody, welcome to week 4 of Introduction to Research. So this week we are moving on to module 3 where we are looking at research methods and research methodology as well actually. And I wanted to just give you a bit of a clue as to the important stuff that you should be learning from the content this week. And I've just put together a couple of slides for you to help you go through this. So let's just have a zip through. Okay, so the first thing that you need to get straight in your heads is the difference between research methodologies and research methods. Now, as we say in the content of this week, they are quite often mixed up and people tend to talk about, oh yes, my research method is this, or the methodology is this, and they're actually talking about, they're sort of interchangeable when you're talking in a sort of casual sense, but there are actual strict definitions for the differences between a methodology and a method, and it's important that you guys know, at least getting straight in your head, what the differences are. So let's go through them. So the research methodology is sort of like the way we're going to approach our research. It's either going to be qualitative or it's going to be quantitative. So that really sort of high level thinking about what our research is going to be, that's the methodology. And within each of those huge paradigms of qualitative, quantitative, and then there's also mixed methods, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is, borrowing a bit from both qualitative and quantitative. Within each of those big groupings of research methodologies, there are different methodologies within them. So, for example, qualitative methodology, which you'll remember is, talking about words and experiences and stories and all those sort of text-based understandings of how things are or how someone's experience of something is. Within the qualitative methodology, there are different methodologies. So, for example, when I did my thesis, when I was writing about the experiences of prisoners using their libraries, I used a phenomenological methodology, which sounds horrendous, but it's really not. It just means phenomenology is just getting a story from the person who is experiencing the thing you're studying. So phenomenological studies are things like talking to new mothers to get an understanding of what it's like to be a new mum. It's rather than talking to a doctor to hear what it's like to be a new mum, you actually get it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. That's what a phenomenological approach is. An ethnological approach is another form of qualitative methodology. And that's things like ethnologies are like when you really sort of embed yourself in a group and become one of them and gain understandings of what it's like to be in that group by actually being in it. And people do that, like they're sort of that really old-fashioned, that's a bit rude, but the whole anthropological approach where people would go and live with a African tribe for 6 months and become immersed in their lifestyle and get an idea of learn about who they are as people by being one of them, and that's an ethnological approach. So these are all ways of doing qualitative research, and they are all methodologies. Quantitative, same sort of idea, really broad methodology, quantitative methodology, but within that there are different methodologies. There's things like data analysis, experiments, measuring stuff. So these are all the methodologies. These are the really big picture approaches of how to do some research, and mixed methods we'll have a talk about in a sec. Then we get into methods, and the method is like, the reason I've got this picture here is because when you read a recipe, particularly the sort of the older ones, they'll have the ingredients listed at the top and then they'll have the method, and the method is how you go about doing the cooking. Method in terms of research is exactly the same. So we've worked out what our methodology is, qualitative, let's say. Now we need to know how we're going to go out there and get this data, and that's the method, and also how we're going to analyse the data once we've found it. That is all about method. So what method are we going to use to go and do our research? So for each of the big methodologies, so quantitative and qualitative, there are different methods. So quantitative methodology, where you're looking at experiments and data and numbers and all that stuff, we get the method that we use to get data for qualitative studies is things like surveys, questionnaires, experiments, measuring stuff, looking at data reporting. So all that sort of number methods that we can use to get quantitative data for our quantitative methodology study. Qualitative is different again, so your big approach is a qualitative methodology, and the methods we use within that qualitative methodology are things like interviews, sitting down with people and talking to them, maybe observing people in their workplace, or observing mums with their new babies. It might be, I just heard this fantastic podcast about gathering information in Indigenous communities and how the way they transmit knowledge in the sort of culturally comfortable way for them is through what they call yarning, which is just talking with people. So there's no set interview questions, they just talk and they tell each other their stories, and the interviewer learns from that sort of yarning. So that's another method for a qualitative methodology. So I hope you're getting to see the difference there. Methodology is the big approach on how we're doing this stuff. So it's either qualitative, quantitative, and then within each of those there are methods that we use to actually get the data and analyse the data once we've gathered it. Okay, let's have a look now at mixed methods. Do you like my mixer? Such cute pictures. I'm getting these from the State Library of Victoria image pool, by the way. They're all copyright free and you can download them and play with them and do whatever you want. Good fun. So, mixed methods. Mixed methods is where you are combining the two methodologies. So you've got some quantitative stuff happening and you've got some qualitative stuff happening. And within those you'll have different methods that allows you to gather data, just like you would for a pure quantitative study or a pure qualitative study. So what people frequently do who are doing mixed methods studies is they might say they're interested in why people join university, why people come to university to study. So they might do a survey and they might survey the whole of first year and say, tell me out of these 10 things, 10 reasons why people come to university, which ones apply to you? And then they'll get this huge chunk of quantitative data. They'll say, okay, 20% of people said they come to this university because they want to study something that will lead to a good career. 10% say they come to university because they had no idea what else to do. 20% of people say they came to university because their mum and dad went to university, so that's sort of like the expected thing. So you end up with this whole bunch of quantitative data, lots of numbers. From that, they might look at this quantitative data and go, oh, that's really interesting. So 60% of people are coming to university because they can't think of anything else to do, and they think, well, that's sort of what you do when you leave school, isn't it? Let's talk to these people and learn a bit more about what's driving them. And then that's when they move into the qualitative data phase. So they've done their survey, they've got these big chunks of data that are showing some sort of a story here, something's happening that they need to investigate further. And they choose one bit of that and they go and they find the people who answered those questions in that way and sit down with them, and then they interview them, and then they're getting qualitative data. So they might sit down with them and they say, okay, in this survey you indicated that you came to university because you couldn't think of what else to do with yourself at this point in your life. Can you tell me a bit more about your thinking there? Can you tell me a bit more about your family's attitude to higher education? Can you tell me a bit more about your experiences of your first 6 months at university and how that fitted with your expectations? So all that sort of qualitative data starts coming out. Qualitative data starts coming out. So that's a mixed methods approach. You do your survey at the start. You get these big chunks of data that starts to indicate some sort of a trend or some sort of story that's going on. Then you choose one of these threads in the story and you start doing some qualitative interviewing and observation, or whatever method works for your question that you're trying to answer. And that is the mixture of the two big methodologies, quantitative, qualitative. And sometimes people do it the other way around. We've got a PhD student at the moment in the School of Information Studies who's doing it the other way around. So he's doing a whole bunch of interviews and pulling out some stories from that, and then he's going to build a theory out of what he's hearing. So he's saying, like, okay, I'm hearing that people are doing workplace placements and they're having this sort of an experience. So, okay, that's really interesting. So now I'm going to survey everybody who does workplace placements and see how many people are actually having this experience. So he's building a theory using his qualitative data. And then he's going out and testing that theory with his survey in finding some quantitative data. So he's doing a mixed methods approach, but he's doing it around the other way. Really interesting. Now, big things to learn this week. These are them. So, try and get straight into your head the differences between a methodology and a method, the differences between quantitative, qualitative and mixed methods, and try and get straight in your head, and you might want to draw a table or make some notes for yourself about what sort of methods fit into each methodology. So for quantitative methodology, what sort of methods might you use? For a qualitative methodology, what sort of methods might you use? And that will help cement into your head the relationship between methodologies and methods. So the methodology about the big picture approach that we're going to take, and the methods are the different processes that we can go through to help us gather data and analyze data. I think that will do. That's the main things to learn from this week. So read through the content in the module. It's pretty much saying what we've said here, but in a more sort of complex and in-depth way. And read the textbooks, and there's links through to the textbook pages for you to read to cement this into your heads. And that will do. So this is just where I got my images from. And of course, as always, ask me questions. So there's my email, there's my phone number, there's my Twitter handle. Get in touch, post onto the discussion lists, let me know what you're thinking, and if you have any questions, of course, as always, get in touch with me. And I'll see you next week. Thanks guys. See ya.